the Senior Manager of Search Strategy at Touch Solutions. I have the honor to introduce a friend and a colleague. Thank you. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much. All right. I'm going to see if this fits.
And it does. Nice. 1 for 1. Okay, so you can tell by the title of this slide we're going to talk about analytics today. And I really wanted to introduce myself with a slide that really, acted like I was some legendary analytical savant, but you'll see in a moment that I decided for honesty instead. And it's not because I have this amazing moral high ground, it's just, it's 2017 and you could just Google my name, so. All right, here's the deal. Whoops, hello. I'm not really qualified to give this presentation. I'm not a data scientist. I understand machine learning conceptually, but not really in a way that can be applied. Heck, I'm not even in a web analytics role, I'm just an SEO. And I actually chose this picture because it's a pretty good representation of my adolescence where most of my decisions were pretty random. I don't know where this photo was taken or who that guy was or why I was holding a big jar of pickles or whether my hair was on purpose. Lots of questions. But the fact is, if you knew me 10 years ago, you wouldn't think that I'd be the kind of guy who would present on data, abductive reasoning, or anything else to do with logic, really. And I know there's a few of you who work with me and you're probably thinking, 10 years ago, shoot, Tyler, I'm kind of surprised you're doing this now, which is fair. But now that I've knocked myself down a few pegs, I still feel like I need to defend the topic, because I know what some of you are thinking. But Tyler, this is an SEO panel, okay? It's not about analytics. Well, respectfully, you're kind of dead wrong here, and here's why. In detective work, there's the crime scene, and there's kind of everything else. Everything that leads to and from the crime that helps you put the pieces together. And both are important, no question, but which is most important? The crime scene, right? All of this other stuff kind of loses its meaning if the crime doesn't take place. Well, here's the parallel. Web analytics is your crime scene, okay? None of this other stuff matters. If it's not making a dent over here, who cares? Now, I realize some of you like to go all Minority Report on us and arrest bad content before it harms innocent visitors, and that's cool. And pay attention to those tertiary metrics, but the point is, whether or not web analytics is your primary job responsibility, it's most definitely your problem. And sure, there are automated web analysis tools out there that won't just tell you the what, but the why. In data science, it's a booming profession, it's going to continue to grow. But most of us don't have that knowledge or those resources at our disposal every time we have a question about this stuff. So until we have robots, or people nearly as smart as them, doing that part of our job for us, we're going to have to do our best impression of this guy. And I know it's hard to read back here, but I think this quote does a good job explaining what we're going to talk about today. So Sherlock says, "Eliminate all other factors, and the one which remains must be the truth." It can be overwhelming to dive into these kind of situations. You open up Google Analytics, you're flooded with choices. Where do I start? Where do I go next? I want to remove some of that mystery today. I want us all to get a little bit better at being able to validate, understand, and explain the abnormalities we see in our data in a step-by-step fashion using abductive reasoning. Well, it seems as though Sherlock is magic, and he's just taking a linear and logical approach to solving a problem. Plus, he's a fictional character, so he is kind of magic, but you get what I'm saying. Okay, so here's a roadmap for the rest of this. We're going to start with 2 steps that are extremely simple. They get skipped on a lot, so we got to touch on them. Then we're going to dive into a hypothetical traffic situation using a decision tree, and I'll make sure to have some tips and distractions along the way. Okay, number 1, define the problem. Number 2, validate it. Often in my world, and I imagine many of yours as well, you're not always the one who discovers the problem, but you are asked to figure it out. Tyler, why is SEO tanking? Tyler, we're pacing really hot this month. Any idea why? And I think our first inclination is just to roll up our sleeves and just get the job done. But shouldn't we first make sure there is a job to get done, that there actually is a problem, and that it's defined properly? If you skip out on these 2 steps, you're going to be fine most of the time. But when those inevitable exceptions occur, you're going to be kicking yourself, because you risk falling into a trap of trying to solve something too vague, too narrow, or too normal. Here's what I mean. Too vague. I don't know how many times someone has asked, why is SEO down? Think about that question for a second. What does that mean, right? You might be thinking organic search traffic month over month, and they're thinking, bounce rate week over week. You could be trying to solve the wrong problem entirely, or too narrow. Maybe all traffic tanked, but it was positioned to you as a PPC problem because that's your role. Without knowing the larger picture, you could be looking at this through too narrow of a lens. Or finally, too normal. What if the problem doesn't exist? Depending on your vertical, a lot of you probably experience big traffic swings during holiday weeks. and you should totally expect it. But I'm sure a lot of you have been asked to explain those occurrences because it caught someone off guard, right? Or maybe someone just looked at the data wrong. I mean, we all make mistakes. Ultimately, I want to look at whatever the other person brought this to my attention was looking at to make sure that we're aligned before I go any further. So another way to help validate an issue if you're unsure is to let an equation figure it out. This tool from Distilled uses a formula called the inferring causal impact using Bayesian structural time series models. You know that one. Anyway, what you would do is you'd be retroactively forecasting something you already know the result of, which sounds a little backwards, but bear with me. So then you would compare what actually happened to what you would have predicted to see how far it differs. The more your actual performance deviates from your predicted performance, the more likely you have an issue worth looking into. So this is saying this green dotted line is the forecast, and there's a 99% probability that the actual will fall somewhere within there. So throw in your historical data, run the tool, export it, put it into Excel, and then add in your actual. So yeah, that's probably something worth looking into. Now, luckily that's one of our clients and we meant for it to happen, but you get the idea. Really, it's just a good way for us to go back in time and see if and when things fell off the rails. I wonder what else we could use this for. Too soon? Not soon enough? Who knows? Okay, so, we compare the actual to the prediction, and so far it's kind of in line. And then, we were expecting like a Veep, but anywhere between an Underwood and Independence Day Bill Pullman. Gosh, God bless him. And in terms of actual, all right, let's keep going. So, looks like there is a slide missing. So I don't know about you, but back to that Sherlock quote, eliminating all other factors seems like a lot of work, right? And we're not really afforded with like an eternity to solve every problem. So to help make sure we're thinking things through correctly, we need to be asking the right questions at the right time. Who knows what this game is? What is it?
Guess Who.
Guess Who, nice. So this is where you're playing against someone else who has the same exact characters in front of them. And each of you are assigned a secret character that only you know about. So you take turns asking these yes or no questions until one of you guesses correctly. Really good questions try to weed out half the possibilities each time, right? So like, is this person female? Are they wearing glasses? Do they have on a hat? Those are all pretty good questions. Your first question shouldn't be like, does this person look exactly like Paul Ryan? But he totally does, right? No, that just eliminates one option. So when you're playing Guess Who or a game of 20 questions, it's played off the cuff. But in theory, you could plan out every move in advance. If I ask this and they say yes, I'll ask that. If they say no, I'll ask this, and so on. Well, I've attempted to do that with website traffic swings. Obviously, you can't see this right here, so go to the URL. I'll tweet it out later if you don't get a chance to jot it down now. But I do have a couple caveats. And if you don't know my Twitter handle, it doesn't really matter, but just follow the SEMPO KC in your deductive reasoning. And I don't have time today to go over the difference between that and deductive reasoning. Just know that it's not 100% foolproof. But don't worry, it's not a total sham. I mean, doctors use deductive reasoning. Maybe that should make you worried. I'm sure that rash will go away. I wouldn't worry about it. Anyway, so the second thing is I told you I'm not really qualified to speak on this subject. So what makes you think this tree's any better? In all seriousness, I hope it's helpful when you're in a pinch and you just want to make sure you're thinking things through correctly and in the right order. I can see it on your faces. I knew this would happen. I've discredited myself too much, haven't I? How can you even trust what I say at this point? All right. Well, every tip I share from here on out isn't just going to come from me, because that's not enough. It's going to be backed by a clip from, in my opinion, the greatest television episode in detective work I've ever seen. And art imitates life, right? So it must be legit. And hopefully that'll help my points carry a little bit more weight. Oh, but it's not of Sherlock. It's actually of, that's not it either. Get my slides mixed up? I don't know. What in the... There it is. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Now, I know traditionally this isn't a detective show, but there's one glorious episode that truly embodies the key points in solving mysteries. Which episode, you ask? It's about to get weird. All right. Now, some of you have seen this, and you probably are a little fearful of what we're going to get into. The rest of you are probably equally fearful, which is fair. But just know that we're going to take it one step at a time, and if you ever feel like you're getting lost, just know that the title kind of explains everything you need to know. Okay, let's play a little game of Guess Who with traffic, and let's take a drive with this decision tree through a hypothetical scenario. So, the first question asks if this channel or if this swing is specific to a channel, because tackling a channel agnostic problem is often very different than one of a single source, so it's a pretty good place to start. And we'll say no in this case, but notice the wording of the question. It refers to a traffic swing, which could go either way, not a traffic drop, which leads us to our first tip. Be equally concerned about unusually high performance. I think we can get lazy when things go really well. We just assume it's probably because we were awesome. And that's the case a lot of times. But when it's not, what goes up often comes back down. And it's much better to dive in and understand why so you can prepare everyone for that regression towards the mean. So you answer that one question, we've already weeded out a lot of possibilities. But most of the time we don't have, this game of Guess Who or a decision tree at our fingertips, and it can be tough to remember, which leads us to our next tip. You paid $50 to see this, so keep that in mind. Joke's on you. Okay, keep a log of findings and what's been ruled out. Whether it's a pen and a paper or something more sophisticated, keep track of your progress, especially if you're doing this in phases. Otherwise, you're going to end up coming back to your seat and retracing your steps because you don't know where you left off. So we know it affected all traffic, and seasonality is often the culprit, so is it any to blame? Sure, we'll say yes. But before we close the door on this subject, let's see what Always Sunny has to say. Big deal. Accidents happen. Make sure you know it's actually a problem. You need to know what an acceptable degree of variability is from things like seasonality, even days of the week, just those natural ebbs and flows that are going to keep things from being completely flat. So how much is due to seasonality? Just like Charlie said, we know if it's not really a problem, right? We should have expected that. So we'll say some, which means it's not the whole problem, or in other words, it's not always one thing, everybody. Okay, here's what I mean. So it says quantify how much is seasonality related, continue on specifically looking for the remainder. This is the only part of the decision tree that acknowledges there isn't always an exclusive culprit, okay? Because instead of 58 different conclusions, which is what this tree has, there'd be like 58 million, and I had to draw the line somewhere. So here's what it means. Let's say you had 10,000 visits last month and 7,500 this month. That's a 25% decline. But you were already expecting a 10% drop or 1,000 visits from seasonality, right? So really you should be looking for that remaining 1,500 visits. And that's what I'm trying to get at here. So what you do is you find a factor, estimate its impact, remove it from the remainder until you get to zero. And you keep doing that until you get to zero. And it can take 3 to 4 explanations sometimes, which if it sounds exhausting, it can be. Honestly, it would be a lot easier to just blame it all on seasonality. But before you get too tempted, let's hear what the gang has to say. Inconclusive. Be your own devil's advocate. Now, this one's tough, I have to admit. Once you get an idea in your head, it can really cloud your judgment. And the more and more you get confident in something, the more you should ask yourself, if I'm wrong, how could I tell? Literally try to prove yourself wrong. That's the best advice I can give you on trying to fight your own biases. So, we know it was impacting all traffic, we know seasonality was some of it, but how fast did it happen? Did it creep up slowly, or was it almost immediate? In this case, we're going to say it was immediate, which naturally leads us to wonder, is this a tracking issue? We're going to say no in this hypothetical, but often crazy swings that don't pass the smell test, pun intended, are just as likely to be data retrieval or tracking or reporting issues than ones of actual performance. Well, I'll let Frank explain more. Sometimes the data lies. So this could be anything from a tracking issue, bad filters, maybe it's dark traffic that's bucketing traffic in the wrong way. Keep that in mind. Sometimes what you see is not what you get. All right, we've weeded out a few more. Let's keep going. So what could have made all traffic go in a certain way all at one time, immediately? Maybe it's your push marketing. And in this case, it was. This is one of the 58 conclusions. But honestly, if you had just ramped up a TV campaign, for instance, wouldn't that have been top of mind from the very beginning? After all, the simplest answer is often best. Poop is funny. Now, I didn't have a chance to go through all the analytical wisdom gleaned from this glorious episode, but if you want to check out the rest, it's bit.ly/smelly advice. That's it. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So you said one of the first steps is to define the problem. Who do you go to help you do that? What kinds of questions do you ask?
I'll answer the first question first. It's really the who, what, when, where, why, or at least the what and the when are for sure. So get an idea of time frames. Get an idea of what exactly we're talking about. My example of SEO is down. That can mean a lot of different things. And if someone says, quarter over quarter, for instance, that's 3 months over 3 months. A lot of times I think we can think, okay, well, it magically tanked or started going up right at the turn of the quarter, but really it's a different time. So I like to see things trended out by day. I like to dig in a little bit more so I can maybe redefine the problem. Maybe it is a problem that can be redefined. In terms of your first question, I forgot it. Who do I talk to?
Who do you collaborate with?
I guess whoever is coming to me for the question, I want to understand what their issue is, because sometimes, especially from a client standpoint, they may be saying that they're upset about their rankings, but really they're upset about something more on a business. They're kind of trying to speak my language when I need to do a better job speaking theirs. So it's kind of that asking why 5 times sort of thing. So yeah.